just as a general thing, right? So when you're when you're pausing after inhales and exhales, the pause after the inhale is more in a way energizing, and the pause after the exhale is called a kumbhaka, which is the part that, so technically in yoga anatomy, thought is driven by prana. And so when you pause the breath after the exhale, that prana is temporarily suspended. So then thought lessens. So you could think of thought as like, stuff in the manomaya kosha. So sometimes when you're having too much thoughts, which is often, and the general feeling in yoga circles is that conscious thought tends to be fairly non-productive and unreliable often. So when you're overwhelmed by those thoughts, or there's too many for your liking, contradicting conscious thoughts, like a really good practice is to pause after the exhale. So it's basically, you can use Ujjayi breath, or you could use just regular 3-part breath. I like to use Ujjayi. It's slightly stimulating, but it's also kind of forces the mind. If that's your issue, then it forces the mind to focus, right? So you close your glottis, right? Nice and slow, but not so slow that you can't do it a while. So the mistake I usually see is people like slowing their breath down too much. And the reason that's really important in this case is because we're going to be inhaling, right? We're at the top of our breath, and then we go right into the exhale, so we don't pause. Sometimes it's a natural half a second pause, that's fine, but don't elongate it. And then a nice slow exhale out. At the bottom of the breath, you start by pausing, let's say for a count of 2, and then you inhale again, and you sort of work that ratio to your comfort level. But I think a good starting goal would be to have the kumbhaka be half as long as the exhalation. So if you inhale for 8, right, and you exhale for 8, then you would pause for another 4. But you could also, if that's too long, you could exhale for 6, so you'd have to speed up your exhale.
Right.
And then pause for 3. And the ratio is more important than total length.
Okay.
So in other words, 8 to 4, 6 to 3, they're the same.
Okay.
Those are how they work. And I guess the only other thing I would say is you really want to do that in the zone that you can maintain it. Like, you know what I mean? If you're pushing too hard, you'll have a different effect. So you really want to be very careful to not make your breath so long and the kumbhaka so long, you know what I mean, that you're struggling. So if it doesn't feel like you can do it, you work your way up to the kumbhaka. So first you just breathe in and out, then you breathe in and out with like a very short pause, and then you're breathing out with a longer pause. And once you're there, you should be able to do, say, if you had time, 12 breaths with that pause.
Okay.
So if you can't do that physically, it means your ratios are off.
Okay.
So you might have to speed up the exhale or have the kumbhaka be a little shorter. Whatever it is, it's fine. You have to do it within your capability. But what you'll find is if you practice that breath, just so I don't forget this, when you're done with the kumbhakas, then you go back to shortening the pause after your exhale and then just breathing in and out. So you kind of go into it slowly and then come out of it. But the important thing, I think, is that, you start having, after you get used to it, you start having the experience that you're sort of sitting in the pause after the exhale. And if it's going really well, you're kind of not thinking. And so it'll feel peaceful in that way. But the peace is being generated not from some sort of bliss state, but more like a lack of thought, It's the peace of quiet, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty standard practice. There's lots of different ways to do that in different pranayamas, but a lot of texts I've studied, there's a lot of talk about really extending this kumbhaka. And if you think about it, once you get the mano and the conscious thoughts out of the way, sometimes I imagine it like you have the koshas, right? And you're experiencing the 5 koshas, and now you're taking one out of the equation. So the other ones have more weight, so,
Mm-hmm.
including the Anandamaya kosha, which is hopefully, I mean, you get some of that wider thinking, that natural bliss, because you're out of the stuff that's in the way.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the practice. So I would definitely do it formally.
Mm-hmm.
If you're teaching it, you want to have somebody sort of formally, like sit in the morning, like the way you would meditating, and
Right.
if you have someone going through a lot of like mental disorder, a lot of hard stuff, I would do that as your primary practice. You skip meditating altogether,
Okay.
because meditating's hard, and
Mm-hmm.
even counterproductive at some points, so this is a much more direct, like, I'm dealing with my thoughts. And for everybody listening, like, that's one of the cool things about yoga therapy that's different, than like hanging out with Buddhists, say, who are great, but it's just different. And we would be more likely to say, oh, I'm having a lot of like too many discursive thoughts. Okay, I'm going to give someone this pranayama practice to lessen that, and therefore lessen their suffering, versus more generalized approach of, let's say, mindfulness meditation, which works, but it doesn't work when things are acute. But pranayama will work better with like more acute mental states, because you're sort of forcing the issue with the mind. The kumbhaka is sort of saying like, no thinking, no more, you're done, like a timeout, timeout for the monkey mind. And not all stress, but 80% of human stress is sort of generated by, right, this kind of thinking. Like, too many thoughts, or too many negative thoughts, or too many opposing thoughts at one time, so it's a really solid technique to master yourself too. If you haven't worked on your kumbhakas in a while or ever, I would strongly recommend doing that, because you'll see really quickly, most people I worked with that kind of thing, who I've taught it to, just even in general yoga settings, they're like, holy moly, I've been meditating for like 4 years, and in like 15 minutes I just had like the experience I was looking for, which is no thought, or very few thoughts.